Are you going to tell me when to start specifically?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We are back and live for the 14 Essential Tools to Master Illustrator. I'm Lee Ferrier, Governor of AF District 7. Today's session is sponsored by Nielsen. A little air meat housekeeping reminder that there are buttons to the right for chat, so you can have live chat during the session, and then questions. So you have questions for Vaughn during the event, just type them into the questions section. I will keep an eye on those and help moderate those questions for you, Vaughn.
Okay.
Um, so a description about this event, a lot of people get overwhelmed by Adobe Illustrator. It has 86 tools and we'll probably have a few more by next year. This session covers the 14 essential tools you need to know to master your workflow using Illustrator. New tools and features are great, but when you have deadlines and need to get the work done fast, knowing how to utilize these 14 tools will make your creative process a lot easier and more sustainable. So Vaughn is the creative director at Glitschka Studios. It's a small two-person boutique design firm located in the Pacific Northwest. Their diverse range of illustrative design is sought after by some of the most respected brands in the world. They creatively collaborate with ad agencies, design firms, in-house corporate art departments, and small businesses to produce engaging visual narratives. Vaughn also produces and creates a weekly design series for LinkedIn Learning called Drawing Vector Graphics Laboratory. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to you, Vaughn, and welcome.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to point out before I jump into this, I have a lot of good information to share with you, but coming up with a title doesn't completely cover everything I'm gonna share with you today. Specifically, technically, some of the things I'm going to show you are quote unquote functionality. So they're not technically a tool. I just wanted to point that out. But as was stated previously, at least at this point, I think there's actually a few more tools than this now since the last update. I'm in CC 21. But needless to say, with each update, they add more tools, and a lot of people tend to get overwhelmed, especially when they first approach Illustrator, because there's a ton of tools. And so, the thing I want to say before I jump into it is that if you look at the body of my work over the last, I've been using Illustrator now for 19 years. Previous to that, I used freehand for 15 years. And I don't know all the tools in Illustrator. I know people who do know all the tools, and they're the ones I tend to ask, but you don't need to know all of them. So we're going to focus in on a select few. But the first skill set I want to go over is probably the most important one, and that's drawing. Um, Drawing is a designer's best friend. It's going to facilitate better thinking, better ideation, working out ideas, taking that kind of ethereal idea you have in your head and starting to flesh it out in a visual form. We all know Saul Bass's quote that design is thinking made visual, and this is the primary way for the first steps in doing that. And I'm not talking very extensive drawing, I'm just talking thumbnail drawing. So something like this, we'll touch on this again a little later, and thumbnail drawing like this. So we're not talking complex fine art drawing, we're talking a capturing of the essence of an idea. And then from that point, you can always improve. So I prefer doing all my drawing in analog. That said, my daughter works with me. She does all of her drawing digitally on her iPad using the Apple Pencil so whatever way, whether it's analog or digital, drawing is going to improve your workflow, improve how you approach projects and execute them. So technically, the first tool I want to go over is what most people associate when it comes to vector art, and that is the pen tool. And rightly so, but that said, most often you'll do a combination of shape building. So if you look at the initial drawing I did, I didn't refine it. I didn't try to redraw it tighter. It still guided our efforts to build most of this artwork here. But even before I started building, in this case, a raven, if you think in shapes, it's not only going to help you when you draw by thinking of what you're creating and then just deducing it down in its most basic form in a drawn stage, it's going to help you build it when you move to vector. And if you think in shapes, you can create a lot of things. So if you look at the wine glass that the raven's holding over here, it was all built using simple basic shapes and then just selecting them and uniting them into one unified shape. So if you think in shapes as you build, it's going to make the process a whole lot easier. Now, there's certain points about vector building that are really simple to kind of discern. It's all about where you place your anchor points. And if you look at the path I've already built here, wherever my drawing comes to a point, gets a point. Those are easy to discern. So this is a relatively easy design to create. We would just take the pen tool, and I'm still, by the way, I'm still getting used to CC21. I've been using 19 for the last 2 years. I don't, it's kind of wonky. It doesn't always show the tool you're on, which is a little frustrating. But if I'm building the rest of this, I don't even worry about the arches at this point. I just place my anchor points on the corners like this, and then I'll go back with the anchor point tool, and then you can grab a path and you can just adjust it to your underlying drawing. So that's pretty standard. That's what you should expect when you come to Illustrator. But I'm also going to show you plugins as I go along, because frankly, some of them just do the task a whole lot easier. And I didn't even, this plugin has been around for like 8 years. And I didn't even notice it, and I had it until it's called Subscribe. It's by Astute Graphics. And I had always used this first tool to create a circle, click, figure out where you want the other part, click, and then you can adjust it however you want. So I had used that tool, and then one day I was here and I go, well, I wonder what these other tools do. I never bothered to try it. And then I go, what's this? Arch by points? And I'm like, what's it? Oh, are you kidding me? And I'm going, I've wasted all this time doing it with the pen tool, where I can do the exact same thing, but do it on the fly as I go, pull. It just makes the process faster. It's, nice and precise. So even if you have a plugin, you might not know what it can do. I just want to point that out, because all this type of building now, I do use in that plugin just because it goes faster. Now, when I get to a point where it's not a simple curve, but this is more of an organic side here, this is where just kind of discerning where to place your anchor point. Wherever it comes to a point, gets a point. But as you get up here, it's figuring out where to place it. In terms of this design, kind of finding the tangent right about here, we pull it out just enough to get access to the handles, then close out the shape. And then once again, in Illustrator, they have the anchor point tool, and this is for grabbing a path and moving it. But notice how it moves the corresponding side of the next anchor point. This is why I really don't use this tool that much. But I mean, it's not like it's impossible. You'll be able to, by the way, I should point out, by default, any plugin I show, you can do it in Illustrator. It just might take a little longer. So it's not like you can't do it, you can. It's just the process isn't as refined. And this is a good example of that tool, the anchor point tool. I can grab the handle it pulls out and start adjusting it. I can go back to this and start finessing it like that. But the reason why I don't use that tool is I just prefer a plugin called PathScribe. It's part of VectorScribe plugin. And notice it gives me these white dots. These are called ghost handles. So I don't have to mess with the path. I can just go directly to a ghost handle, pull it out, get access to the anchor, go over here on this one. And it just makes the process a lot faster and a lot easier. So whether you want to use the native pin tool and the native anchor point tool to adjust and bend those paths, kind of like forming clay of sorts. Either one's fine. I just think it's a lot faster and more precise with a plugin for me personally. Now, the reason why I say there's no settings on this is you can double click on the anchor point tool, and you can't customize it. You can't make it as sensitive or overt as you'd like. And that's one reason why I like using plugins, is because I can customize the tool and make it perform the way I want to. And when Illustrator kind of ripped off that same feature from Astute and integrated it into Illustrator, I was asking them, are you going to give us controls so we can adjust the sensitivity and how it behaves? And their response was just, well, we don't want to confuse the user. So that's why I prefer using plugins at times. So when it's all said and done, this is our base vector art. This is how this design specifically came out. Let's jump to the next tools. And this is shape building. Now, yes, you'll use the pen tool quite a bit in Illustrator. Think more organic shapes, free-flowing shapes. And you'll be adjusting those Bezier curves and handles to get nice, elegant curves. But at times, shape building is a lot faster to do this. And a combination of both is what you're going to mostly do as you approach any type of project. So once again, that skill set of kind of thinking in shapes, thinking about the specific motif you want to create, and then how to go about creating it, that's half the creative battle. And a lot of that can be solved by basic shapes combined with the pen tool. So I'm going to zoom in here because I want to talk about rounding. And so inside Illustrator, you have a rounding tool now. So if you, I think I have it turned off. Let's turn it on there. When you have an anchor point selected, you can round the corner with the corner widget tool that shows up. In this case, if we select these two, we can round that off. I can direct select these other anchors. I can make a copy of this. By the way, in Illustrator, there is no clone command, meaning just clone the shape directly on top. In freehand, I had that for 15 years. So the first thing I did when I came to Illustrator is I figured out what commands clone. So in this case, if we take this shape here and we want to clone it, you have to go Command-C, Command-F. Command-C is copy, Command-F, paste in place. And so I just recorded an action and applied it to the F3 key. So I can just hit F3. This now makes a copy of the shape I have here. And if I go to the reflect tool, find a central anchor point, reflect it over, all I did there is made the shape I want to combine with these other shapes using Pathfinder Unite and just combine them. So I do use the rounding tool in Illustrator. I also use a plugin because that existed 6 years prior to Illustrator ever kind of adding it. But the Pathfinder is a great way. Let's go ahead and fill this so you can see it a little easier. Whatever shapes are on top of other shapes in Illustrator, in this case, we'll unite these two. And we're going to minus front. Only an engineer would call that minus front. In my opinion. In freehand, they just called it punch. And so you'll probably see me make that reference because I still call it punch, like a cookie cutter, one shape on top of another, and you punch it through. And all these basic shapes, when formed, I don't know what we're going to color this. Let's color purple, I guess. So not that all of you have a lot of need for a battle axe in your design, but it's just to demonstrate how you can avoid the pen tool altogether if you think in shapes at times, and your results are going to be a lot more precise, and you don't have to struggle with all the anchor point placement and Bezier curves as well. But let's look at one that's a little more practical. And once again, we're just thinking in shapes here, and you could even try to guess what this is going to be. You'll see apparently as I kind of put it together, but I'm going to show you how I'll use rounding and shape building kind of together to get what I need. Now, the rounding tool I use is dynamic graphics, but again, I want to point out everything I'm showing you, you can do with the rounding corner widget in Illustrator. You don't need a plugin. It's just, it goes a little faster with a plugin. And since I have finite amount of time, I'm using that in Illustrator. Now with the corner widget, you'd have to select an anchor to get the controls to round it. The corner widget just detects, or the dynamic corners plugin I use detects corners, and you don't have to select anything. You can just immediately start rounding. So maybe we're going to round this one like that. And I'm going to go ahead and clone it. And once again, this is where all these methods come together. So if you've never set up keyboard shortcuts, figure out all those routines you do on a regular basis as you're building vector art. Those are great candidates to turn into keyboard shortcuts. Therefore, you don't have to go to a pull-down menu and pull down to certain things. You can just do it immediately with one button push. So we're going to take this, and shape building is all about taking other shapes and editing a previous shape. So we're going to edit this one by minus front pathfinder. Maybe we select these two, we put them together, go to rounding. I'm going to round that out. And one reason I love this plugin is I can hover over a corner and decide, okay, that looks good. Let's select this shape. It remembers my last round, and then I can apply it to a new corner like that. So on this one, maybe we fuse these together, pull this one out, and we'll apply a round there. Then we can take everything, unite them together. I'll go back to the rounding tool like this. You know, I make adjustments along the way. This is a little thin, maybe beef that up like that. And shape tools, obviously, these are the easiest. I use the ellipse tool most often, but you can see how quickly you can build something. It goes a lot quicker if you're not explaining every step like I am here. So shape building all comes down to, you know, how you think, how you deduce from complexity to simple form. But it works really great for obviously doing logo marks and graphics, icons, that type of thing. So that's in general how shape building works. Let's go ahead and move to the next one. And once again, some of these things I'm showing you in previous stages of this talk. So I just showed you the Pathfinder, but we're going to cover it again. Basically on the Pathfinder, you have the top row of 4 Pathfinder shape modes, and then at the bottom you have other abilities of the panel. To be completely honest, I almost never use the bottom row. I just focus on the top row of 4, and even within that, I only use the first 3 99% of the time. Rarely do I ever use exclude. But it's easy. They do have a shape building tool, and I'm going to show you that in a second in Illustrator. But I still don't find it as fast as the Pathfinder, because it's easier when you build to create multiple pieces and combine them together. You'd never want to try to build something like this by going on around the perimeter with the pin tool. It'd take you forever. But once you build it in shapes, you can simply unite it with Pathfinder. Maybe you color it a green and get rid of the outline, and it makes the process go a lot faster. Now, there is a different way you can do this. It's slower. It's a new tool. You can select all of these, and let's say, and one thing that makes it easier to use is you can color fill. Let's say we'll color it black, outline to nothing. go to the shape building tool here, and let's go and zoom in, because you pretty much have to zoom in when you use this to see everything. As you hover over sections, it's going to default to add to. So it's going to automatically add to shape. If you hold the option down, you're going to see you'll like remove, how do I say it, minus front from shape. So with the shape building tool, if you just start dragging over areas like this, you can combine them like this. Doesn't have to be precise, but, and this might go a little faster if you're using a Wacom. I'm just using a mouse. And then when you let go, it's going to combine them all together. But if you miss a part, you're going to have to go back and kind of combine that together. So it performs the same function ultimately as the Pathfinder, but I never use it this way just because it just takes longer. So I'm going to show you what I do use that tool for and what I think it's ideal for. So I just wanted to point that out. Minus front, this is where you take two shapes, and the top shape will knock out of the background. And so engineers decided to call that minus front. So obviously, if you're working on icons or logos, this is a methodology you would use. Intersect, this is when you want the two shapes that you're using to combine. So wherever they overlap becomes a new shape. So in that respect, we're going to clone the background shape. Once again, it's just a one button push for me, F1, and I'll select the top shape, we'll intersect it, and so it just makes the shape that those two shapes are combined to make. In this case, maybe we wanted this a tan, and then we had turned the background into a brown, something like that. So that's how you'd use that functionality. Let's jump to the next one, because this is still shape building. This is still Pathfinder methods, but it's within a specific tool called the shape building tool. And I found the easiest way to use this tool is if you have a motif in mind, like build all it's like a baking show. You have to have all the ingredients in place to use it. And if you do that, the most unintuitive aspect is if you fill it with any color, get rid of the outlines, and now you might be saying, well, you can't see anything when they're all highlighted like that. Well, as you go over, once again, by default, if you just start dragging through things, everything you drag through, it's going to combine. So you can see how these shapes are combining. Actually, let me do this because this is probably small on your screen. We'll zoom in. There we go. Let's do that again. So with the shape building tool, you just drag through the shapes you want to combine like this. And when you let go, you'll see it combines it. With this tool selected, if you hold Option down, it's going to minus from shapes. So if we want to combine these eyes, maybe this body like that, and then holding Option down, it'll subtract shapes out of that shape. So we'll add to the feathers, let go of Option, we'll combine this, hold Option down to remove that. Maybe we're going to remove this, and then we'll combine the tail and the wing. And that's how you could pull off a design, almost like a positive negative design of sorts on something like this. If you tried to do that with the Pathfinder, you'd have to make copies of shapes, intersect shapes. It'd be a lot more time consuming. So in this respect, the best method to use would be the shape building tool. Now, that said, we're going to go back to one of those thumbnail drawings I showed you previously. Give me 1 second. Okay. Here's the thumbnail we drew previously. We can go ahead and turn that off. And where the shape building tool shines is using strokes. So let's zoom in on this. And I took that thumbnail sketch. By the way, anybody could draw that thumbnail sketch I showed you. That's why I'm using it, because when you go to build it, I didn't worry about my drawing being perfect. You look at the pot, looks like it's melting, but it's easy to use shapes to build that content accurately. And so I just want to point that out. You don't need to get your drawing perfect. Now, I wanted to create a line work type of style with this. Previously, the only way you could do this is you would have to zoom in on areas like this, go to the scissors tool, have smart guides turned on, Command U, which tells you when you're over a path or over an anchor, kind of find where two paths are, and then you'd have to cut it. Then you'd have to select the part you don't want and delete, and that's how you would trim these up. Well, with the shape building tool, it's a lot faster. We can just select everything, go to the shape building tool, hold minus down because we want to remove, not add. And if you just draw over these areas that are extending past the leaf shape in this context, we can just remove them by just swiping over it. Now, once again, I'm using a mouse. If you work with the Wacom, this would go even faster just because it's easier to control. And then we'll select this one and just get rid of that. So you can do it really quick. And this is what I usually use this tool for, is when I'm working in strokes, makes the process go really, really fast. Now, in respects to this design, yes, I have cheat notes because I'll get off track if I don't stay on target. We're going to select all of these. And if we go to strokes, and I would bump this stroke up to like 3 points. And one of the functions or methods I use quite a bit is I'll build in strokes to get the base artwork figured out, figure out the weight I want to use. And then in this respect, I would go to object path and I go outline stroke. It turns it into shapes, unite it with Pathfinder. So you see how all these functions kind of work together. So the more you get used to that, the easier to build and create content is going to get, because you'll use these functions and tools over and over and over again. And if you get in the routine of simplifying the process, it's going to speed things up, but you won't reduce your quality, is I guess what I'm saying. And then I would fill this. Now, you can see the sketch through it. That's because this is like a stained glass. All the inner shapes are see-through. So ultimately, we would want to get our artwork so it's a clean shape like this and expand it. And so all these interior shapes are just white shapes floating on a black background. And that's not hard. Let me step back. I'll just basically, all you need to do is go to object, go to compound, release. You might have to ungroup it, select the inner shapes, white, and you're there. So not hard, doesn't take a long time. I set this up like a cooking show, so I wouldn't have to explain that. And then I went ahead and did it anyway. So I like to use tonal families, basically a color palette. When I use freehand had a really cool feature where you could drag your swatches to the desktop and you could tile them like this. And you could make value comparisons between the hues, and it helped color exploration. I've been trying to convince the Adobe team they need to add this, but they don't seem too interested. But I did it because I kind of replicate what I did in freehand for so many years, because it's hard to tell value adjustments on colors in the swatches. Even if you have it at the largest setting, they're still not that large, and they have white gaps around them. So it's really hard to see color against color. So I just build it myself. I actually hired a guy to write a script for me that I can open up a new document and it automatically creates a palette like this for me that I can fill with colors. So if any of you are interested in that, just track down my email and I'll send it to you. But once you have it, we're going to focus on the eyedropper tool. And once again, I noticed that there, it doesn't always kick into the icon in 2021. It's a little odd. But all we're going to do now is we're going to color this. So the way the eyedropper tool works is you can hover over the color, sample it just by clicking it. So it's like sucking up the ink. And then you can go over to a shape, and let's say it's this shape, and we can just go ahead and hold Option down and not apply it. Let's do that again. There we go. Usually what I do is I'll select a shape and just sample this. But that said, you can also sample a color, oops, with it unselected, sample a color like this turquoise, hold Option down, go down to whatever shape and apply it. So you can do it both ways. That wasn't too smooth that I showed you there. Sorry, I haven't even had coffee this morning, so you guys are hit me pretty raw. Actually, on this one, I think I'll color this purple. We'll color these two that color like that. Now, on this, I didn't want black, so we're going to color it blue. So that's usually how I do my colors. I literally kind of create my base art, and then I do color exploration. I focus on form and shape first, and then when I move to color and start coloring it, I'm already thinking about it in my head, but I kind of break down the process that way. Now, here's something that a lot of people I found don't really know, and that is you can color things by bringing a photo. Maybe you see a cool color reference. You just grab an image of that. Maybe it's on a website or whatever, drag it into Illustrator, and you can also use that to color as well. So maybe on this one, we want to do the same. So we're going to, maybe we select this shape and we want it part of the sand color. Instead of aqua here, we'll go up here in the blue, maybe select one of these colors. And now with the CC21, if you kind of hover, if you look at your color palette over here, I wish it would do it on the object, but it doesn't. If you click with the eyedropper and move it around, you can just watch that until you hit a sample that you like, let go, and it'll apply the colors. So it works pretty easy in that respect. Here on the leaves, maybe we sample this color here or that. Select this, go to a darker hue. That's not dark. Go like that. That looks horrible. So you can see I'm doing a great job of showing you an example here. Let's take the outline. Maybe you don't want blue. You can sample a brown from the trunk. So it's an interesting way to find and kind of work out color. I've used this in pretty absurd ways. Like I did a design of the Big Lebowski, the dude, and I forced myself to take a photo of him wearing his goofy sweater, and I colored everything using that as my source of color. So you can do this. Now, the other thing about the eyedropper tool that some people don't realize is you can color attributes. So these are all live fonts as you're showing here, and I might want to take this font style and apply it to other type. And if I just sample it with the eyedropper, it's going to do that. Once again, you can also sample, oops, I have that selected still, sample this one, go over here, hold Option down, and you could do it that way. So it works the same way. That said, it doesn't copy everything. It copies that kind of attribute. This artwork, it'll copy the color and the font style, but it's not. But I've used the shear tool to kind of italicize it because this isn't an italic font, and I added an effect, a little drop shadow. It will color everything but that kind of shearing effect that I applied to it, and won't copy the drop shadow. So if I copy that, you can see it copies the font and the color, but other things such as distorting a shape, there isn't any information there that'll copy over. So there is a little limitation here I want to point out. But it also works on body copy. If you have body copy in maybe you're laying out, I don't know, business card or whatever. You can copy that and it'll copy, once again, the style of font and the color applied to it. So that's one way I use that tool quite a bit. Let's take a look at the layers panel and isolation mode. Now, we're already using the layers palette. I'm kind of using Illustrator as a presentation tool of sorts. But notice I don't have the little arrows for sublayers. I view layers in Illustrator much like a horror movie you might watch, and the character decides, hey, I think it's a good idea that a serial killer is following me, and I'm going to go down to the scary basement where he's probably at, and you're screaming at the TV or whatever, going, don't go down there, you know? Well, that's the way I view sublayers in Illustrator. The scary basement of vector art, you don't need it. If you organize your layers on primary layers like I'm doing here, you never have to go to the basement. And if you don't like having that on, or you accidentally click it on at times, it can just be a pain, because one single anchor point will make up its own sublayer and you can't even see it. And I understand why engineers did it, because engineers like that kind of stuff. But creatives, it's overkill in my opinion. If you want to turn it off on your end, just go to option menu for layers, go down to panel options, and just toggle on and off this top switch for show layers only. And so if I toggle this off, click OK, we now have the scary basement access reestablished. So I always go to this area and turn that off because you really don't need it. Now, isolation mode. If any of you are familiar with Flash, this is where they kind of got this idea for isolation mode. So when I work on brand identity projects, this is an exploration for the Chisholm Trail. It's basically a cowboy museum in Oklahoma. And I use isolation mode quite a bit when I'm working on branding projects, because in case of this design direction we did, I have elements that make up the banner, but I have them all grouped because I didn't fuse shapes together. And so if you double click, you go into what's called isolation mode. Everything else is non-selectable, so you can't accidentally highlight it and move it as you're moving other things. The control for this shows you kind of the fourth dimension you're in now. And this is where you can double click into a group and you can make any adjustments you might need without affecting any other thing in your composition. And I use this quite a bit. I'll do this for type here. So if I go into type here, I can now select different characters if I wanted to tweak them. But all of these, where it really helps is when you have a complex piece of art like this for, in this case, this cowboy, all of these elements are kind of just floating on top of one another. So this is when I get it to its final, the way I want it to look. I have all the colors applied to it. I'll just group this. And so now it's a group, but I can always click into it and make any adjustments through isolation mode. I'll then take all elements and I'll go ahead and group it. So if people decide to move it and use it, it's not going to mess anything up. But I can always go back in, double click it. This is still in a group mode. I'm in isolation, and then I can drill down to the specific isolation to work on it. So isolation mode is really kind of nice. It's one of the things Illustrator did really well. So that's isolation mode. Let's jump to the next one. So I want to kind of talk about the appearance palette and graphic styles. This was a mascot we worked in, and let me make sure I have the appearance palette open. Okay, I'm going to drag this up here so it'll be easier for you guys to see. We'll do that. And what I want to do with the appearance palette is the appearance palette. I got in trouble one time. I do LinkedIn learning content, and I referred to the appearance panel in my movies as think of the appearance panel as layers on steroids, and somebody took offense at the layers palette doesn't take drugs or something like that. So now I use my safe word for it, and that is it's like the layers palette with magical abilities. So unless somebody's offended by wizards, they shouldn't care now. So the nice thing about the appearance palette is you can take any shape, like the profile back shape. This is just sitting behind a lot of different shapes here for this Viking character. And we're just going to add multiple attributes to this character. The first one here, you can see, is just a fill. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and add a stroke color. And so we'll go down here and we'll add this gray, and we're going to make this 6, but we don't want it here. We're going to move this stroke down underneath the fill like that. And let's adjust it. We're going to go to like 12 like that. And then under stroke, we're going to make sure this is rounded. And then we want to keep adding another attribute to this overall shape. So we're going to go up here to the option menu, and we're going to go add, in this case, a new stroke. You can see it makes a copy. It's going to default to the same settings, but this one we want to make white, and we want to double the width so we can actually see it. We'll go 24, and you can see how it adds multiple characteristics. You can have multiple fills. That works great. We're going to add one more characteristic to this, and that is we're going to go to effects. We're going to go down to stylize, and we're going to go to drop shadow, and it'll default. I tend to, that's a little too harsh. We'll that maybe 5, 3. These settings can be whatever you want. So let's say that's what we want, and we want multiplies, so it multiplies with the background. So all these attributes are now associated to this one shape. Like when I used to use freehand, I could do all this, but they had to be separate shapes, just kind of stacked. And this allows you to embed this into graphics. Now, the one aspect that's really nice about this is once you figure out the aesthetic, like this is what I want all the brand graphics, for example, to be styled like this, that have the same treatment that we've just set up, you can grab this now, just drag it into the graphic styles palette, and you can see it makes a style. You can click in and name this however you want, but it allows you then, let's go ahead and put the appearance panel back. It allows you then to select a shape. Once again, we're going to use that isolation mode, drill into this, select the background shape, go to the graphic style, and it'll apply the same style to this. So this works really well if you're putting up like a unified set of graphics, either in a branding context or, for example, let me go back to my layers here. You might be working an iconography set. And so you can see this first icon, I worked out what the highlighting is. We have all the other icons in the set, and I can apply that same graphic style to it. So the appearance panel is great for working out that kind of visual content. And graphic styles is a great way so you don't have to recreate everything all the time. If you know you're going to be using it within the context of a project, then establish the graphic style. And then that way it's a one button push to apply it to anything moving forward. Now, I use graphic styles by default in my new document that I open up in Illustrator. And it's this one here, and it's all line work. Instead of having to recreate dotted lines and dash lines, I have a starting point, and then I just finesse it from here. The reason why I have graphic styles in different weights is because right now I'm kind of zoomed out. Think of this as we're orbiting Earth, and it's a lot easier to work on content when you zoom in. If I'm using my default and I'm zoomed in, well, a path could be really thick and I can't see a sketch behind it. So I have really thin ones set up so I can zoom in and still see what I'm trying to create. That's the only reason I created those. So you might want to consider that, add it to your default document file. So every time you open up Illustrator, these are already preloaded, as you can see in my graphic styles palette. I also have not so much, this one doesn't really show it, but I have a set of um, tonal families that default into every file, and then I'll adjust. Gives me a starting point for colorization. Another feature slash functionality inside Illustrator is the property panel. So the property panel is Adobe's attempt to simplify a process. So if I want to offset this artwork, because the styling for most sports graphics usually has an outline around it that's either white if it's on a dark background, or it could be a light gray, for example. So on this, you would have to go to Object, pull down to Path, and go to Offset Path. But what I just did there, you've probably done that before. Oops, and okay, you finally get to where you want. This is where you go to find this. You click it. You can set it for whatever you want. Click OK. If you have the properties panel open, I don't think I do, so let's open that. This will give you immediate access to some functions. They know you have the shape selected. What are all the possible things you could do with that shape? One of them is offset. So there's a button here. You can just click it and it takes you right to that. It's their attempt to make access easier. Now, that said, I'll just point out, in this case, actually, let's go ahead and do the offset since we have it. We'll do 7. You can preview it. That looks good. We'll click it. And then in this context, I don't know, we'll color it. Oops, not the stroke color, color the fill, like that. The one thing I need to point out about the properties panel is it won't always show you the shortcut. If it's a compound path, it won't work. You have to do it the old way. I don't know why they set it up that way, but I just wanted to point it because it is there. So I just wanted to mention it, even though 25 years or 19 years now, muscle memory, I don't really use it that much, to be completely honest. Once you get used to things, it's easy just to stick with it. But offset, I use every single day. And it's to do just like this, to offset this shape. And in context of this design, this works great for creating that amount of detailing on the outside, so it pops off of a background. But I also use it in other ways to kind of build out other content I need. So all of this is just simple shapes sitting on top of other shapes here. But after I get the outside stroke kind of established, I'll just select all the elements not needed, like this white, get rid of that, and then everything left behind, I'll go ahead and unite. Once again, this is how I'll utilize different features all together, unite these shapes. And one thing I need to point out with the appearance palette, when you use a Pathfinder function to unite, this is going to change to group. I want to change that back to a compound path. And to do that, you have to go to Object, Compound, Make. Notice I have F7. That's a keyboard shortcut. So I never do it this way. We'll go ahead and do it now. So it's now a compound path. There's a reason why I'm showing you this, and I'll explain it in a little bit. We'll take this top shape, take the shape behind it, which is the dark blue. We're going to minus front, or kind of punch through that cookie cutter. Notice the appearance. It's reverted back to a group. And there's a reason why I'm pointing this out, because it trips a lot of people up. So all I do anytime I make a Pathfinder function like that, I'll hit F7 and it'll change group to a compound. Then I'll select the next shape underneath and I'll minus front through that. Notice it'll default back to a group status. And you have to pay attention to this or it's going to trip you up. And I'll demonstrate that in just a little bit. In this case, I'll turn it white. Now I have a simplified background and the full color version. So I use this for branding all the time, whether it's the offset and creating different assets needed. Now, let me kind of explain let me zoom over here. And I'm just going to get rid of this guy really quick because I want to explain something. This here is a donut. The middle part is see-through. If you look at the appearance palette, you can see it's a compound shape by default. And if you select these are a group. Well, I'm going to go ahead and make that a compound. So now both of these shapes, whether it's a donut or this or compound, but let's say for whatever reason, we'll zoom in so you can see what's going on. We want to take a bite of sorts out of these group of shapes down here. So let's go grab the ellipse tool. We'll create a shape. In this case, we'll just color it something else like that. And we're going to take a bite out of this using minus front, and we'll do that. And notice, again, it's going to revert back to a group. Now, this is something that tripped me up when I first came to Illustrator, and I've noticed through the years doing workshops and working with other designers that they run into this and they think they're doing something wrong. And I'll just tell you right now, you're not. The problem is Adobe thinks this is expected behavior, and I think it's counterintuitive in my opinion. But when you make a shape like this, it's going to default back to a group. And let's say you decide, well, I want to take a bite out of this shape down here. Once again, we'll color it so you can see what I'm doing. And you select this, and you select this one, and you minus front, and content disappears. Literally, Illustrator says this is expected behavior. It's not. It shouldn't be. Let's put it that way. Now, it's easy to see that something disappeared when I did that because this is a very simple example. But what I ran into when I moved to Illustrator, would I be zoomed in on something, working on detail, and I'd make an edit like that, and 10 minutes would go by. And I would zoom out, and other areas of my design, or maybe it's an illustration, wouldn't be there. And I'm like, what the hell? Where'd everything go? It's because of this issue. It's because of the compound problems that Illustrator has, and they don't seem to think it's a problem. So if you've ever been working in Illustrator and you've gotten frustrated because you've seen this, just know you're not doing anything wrong. So this is why I set up, I can, after I do any function, like taking this bite here, when it's a group, I just hit F7. So when I go ahead and subtract another shape, it'll work, nothing will disappear, but you always have to remember to turn it back into a compound path. Kind of a hassle, but it might demystify something you've run into before in Illustrator. And if so, now you know why. And if you don't like it, let Adobe know. That's the only way they're going to change their mind. I convinced them one time to make that default in Illustrator with Pathfinder methods. It defaults to a compound path. And for whatever reason, Adobe certified pros got all upset and they changed it back. So there you go. So let's go back to the layers palette here and rotate. Rotate's pretty easy. Any shape, you just grab it. You can immediately rotate. You don't have to select a tool, anything like this. If you have certain angles set up within your preferences, you can snap it to 45 or 90-degree angles by holding the Shift key like that. But the way rotate works the easiest is just grab a shape and you can rotate around, turn it into a sad guy. If you go to the rotate tool and select it, by default, you'll see a target in the middle. And I'll tell you right now, I rarely ever use this, but you might find some usage for it. Your first click will establish the orientation. Let's say it's right here. And then if you start rotating, it'll go around whatever orientation you sent. Once again, I don't use that too often, but just wanted to point it out. The way I use rotate is in the context of building. Now, if I'm creating a design like this, it's easier to build things at 90 degrees. It just makes the process easier. So if I wanted to add some scallop detail of sorts, I might take all of these like this. I'd take this and I'd snap it. I want to cut all these in half. So I'd select all of these. This is where I go to the shape building tool and lock those off. So I get what I want, throw that away. And then I want to align this to my drawing over here. So I'd probably group this, hover over an anchor point with smart guides turned on, Command U to toggle it on and off. I drag it over, find an anchor, snap it to that, go to the rotate tool, place my orientation on that same anchor here, click it. Let's go ahead and move this over. And then once I have that, I can drag this over until it snaps to the edge. And now I can simply just scale it up like that. So that's how I'd use rotate in context of building. It just makes the process easier to build in 90 degrees and then kind of compose as I shown you there. Now, I kind of sped through that because I wouldn't leave it like this. And actually, now that I look at it, okay, this brings up another issue. I'll just point out, sorry, didn't mean it to turn into this, but hey, it's Illustrator, you run into it. I had clicked here and then we rotated it over. There's a snapping bug in Illustrator. I first noticed it in CS6 when they introduced it through one of the first Creative Cloud updates. They still haven't fixed it. It's going to be 10 years old. Almost, it's going to be a teenager soon. And I keep bugging them to fix it. And that's why, because when you zoom in at times, you'll notice it didn't actually snap. And now you know why. So there's that. Let's jump to the next tool. This is our functionality that is symmetry. Sorry, had George Bush moment there. This is all about creating design that's symmetric. So it's nice because you don't have to create half. And if you use the reflect tool, we'll go over here, that you just make a copy, Command C, Command F, find a central anchor point with smart guides turned on, and go ahead and reflect it using a reflect tool. Then you can go ahead and unite using Pathfinder. Make sure you make sure this is a compound. And then if you saved any graphics styles, you might be able to colorize it like that, or maybe we'll colorize it like that. So symmetry is a lot of fun, obviously, to work with. Whenever I'm working with a design motif, let's say it's a logo design, and I'm using symmetry, I always try to create what I call the odd man out. So the wing on this, we'll just go ahead and clone it, use the reflect tool, find a central anchor point, reflect it over. I don't bother to build something if I can reflect it, but it's always good to have something in a design that's reflected, in my opinion, that's kind of the odd man out. So I'm going to take this shape and I'm just going to go ahead and edit the wing here. Then I can take all of these and unite them like that, and then just apply a color to it, maybe a dark blue, to get what I need. So one thing I'll point out is in the new CC21, they changed the way guides look. So when not selected or interacted with, this is what you're going to now see. And if you select, notice it'll cause the guide to select. I'm still on the fence if I like that or not, but that's the way it is in the latest version. I have a few more things I'm going to go over, and then we'll be done. And I keep having a lot of people ask me about patterns. So I'm going to show you the simplest way to approach a pattern. Anybody can do this. Start off with a bounding box. It can be a square, it can be a rectangle. Anything that falls within that, doesn't matter where it's at. You can just adjust it for your own preference regarding how it balances with other shapes and the spacing between them. The only ones you need to be concerned about is the overlappers. These are the ones that go off the top. This means they're going to come in on the bottom, go off the left, they're going to come in on the right. I usually test it with the bounding box. I'll select these. and I'll make a copy. I'll drag it down and snap it to this corner. I have smart guides turned on, and I can see it's going to work well this way. I would test the one on the left side too, but in all reality, this is all you need to make a pattern. And it's really easy. Just select all your art, including the bounding box, because we're going to use that to make the repeat. Drag, drop it into your swatches, deselect. If you don't deselect, it'll fill it with that pattern when you're done. I've made that mistake before. Now that we've drug it into here, we'll double click. This takes us into pattern mode. We'll click on the pattern tile tool. Think of this as the scaling kind of box you get on the desktop. And all we're going to do is grab the top here, drag it down and snap it to that bounding box. And notice it's showing you how it's going to work. It's coming in on the bottom. Then we drag this one over, snap it to the bounding box, and now it's coming in on the left. This is everything we need. Select the bounding box, delete it. We don't want that part of the pattern. And it's already showing you what you're going to get with the pattern fill. I have it dimmed. You can adjust that if you want this darker, etc. But this is just the fundamental basic way to build a pattern, compose it on your desktop, construct it to an actual pattern fill within the tool. That way, we can take a shape, and if you go to the appearance panel, since you can have multiple attributes, we're going to add a new fill, and we'll click that. And then with this new fill, we're going to fill it with our pattern. And you can see how easy it is to do that. Now, if you wanted to add a little more dimension, you could select this swatch you made with the pattern fill in it and just duplicate it. Click into the duplicated one, select, actually, you don't even have to drag select it. I can just go Command A and fill it with white, double click. So now we have a white version of our pattern. Go back to the appearance panel, and we're just going to add one more fill. And we're going to go ahead, and my alarm's saying I'm almost done. So I'm going to click it with the white, and it's going to align exactly with the other pattern. So if you want to adjust your pattern flow through a shape, in this case we do, we don't want it sitting directly on top. We're going to go to rotate and double click into it, and we want to make sure not to have transform objects. And you can see as you adjust it, it'll just adjust the rotate, and this is where your prerogative comes in. Let's say that's what you want. Click OK. Now we can go into this layer in the appearance panel. I don't want 100% value, so let's knock it to 25, see what that looks like. Okay, that's too faint, so let's add a little bit. We'll add 10%. And so you can create a nice dimensional type of pattern too. So a lot of things you can do with patterns. That's the easiest way to kind of set it up. And you tend to want to do that on your desktop and then make it an actual pattern within the tool. If you try to compose everything in the pattern tool, there's certain functions that aren't available to you that are on the desktop. So I try to do it all kind of outside that, I don't know, isolation mode type pattern space. Now, I've been doing a lot of designs that look like this, use all the same tolerances, line weights, the outside line weight, and a lot of the same color palette going on here, but I create patterns for each one. And it usually starts off like this. The first thing you want to do is whatever size you build at is what your pattern is going to be sized at. So in this case, I'm just going to scale this down by, well, you know what? This is bringing up another issue right now with the Illustrator. You get to experience it. Notice I double clicked and I typed in 50 and I go, yep, that's what I want. Well, one bug that's new to CC21 is that doesn't always work, as it's not working now. So we'll just, instead of mathematically doing it, we'll just go ahead and scale it down like this. Won't be exact since I know it's not 50%, but that's okay. Welcome to my world of Illustrator. We're going to make an offset, use that function. And I'm just going to offset this almost half. Let's see, maybe 10. Oops, I went the wrong direction. Let's try that again. Okay, we'll go minus 10 is what I want, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, maybe not so much. Let's try 5, 7. See, normally I go 50% and then I know it's minus 5. But because it's not, okay, price 6. We'll do 6. Okay, there we go. All I'm doing here is I'm creating a guide I'm going to use to control the spacing between elements in my pattern. And it's easier to do this than trying to wing it inside the pattern tool. So once I figured out, we'll go with that. I'm going to clone all this, Command C, Command F. I'll go ahead and rotate this, slide it over. I'll take this inner path, I'm going to snap it to the other art's inner path, and that's going to establish the gap between all my artwork, whether it's on the inside or whether it's going to the outside. We'll take this, we'll clone this, once again, we'll rotate it, and then I'll snap like that. Now we can take all of this, drag it in, make sure we have our swatches palette open, drop it in our swatches palette, double click in here, click the tile tool. And if I use the scaling box in the tile tool and I hold Option Shift, it'll just do it from all 4 sides, and I'll snap it in. That's what we want. Here's a keyboard shortcut. If you wanted to do it through the menu, you'd have to go Select, Same, and Stroke Color, and that way it would select all your strokes. But I just select one. I have a keyboard shortcut button push. I don't have to go to that menu. Again, a good reason to set up keyboard shortcuts. And this is what the pattern's going to look like. So now we can go here, click this. We don't want an outline. We're going to apply the pattern. If you want to size it, you think you built it too big in this case, double click on the scale tool, deselect transform object. That's a little too small. Let's try that. And that looks good. We'll go to rotate, and you can set your rotate however you want. Then you can go back to the appearance panel. If you want a background color, we do. So we'll add a fill, and we'll colorize this black like that. So it doesn't take a long time to create a pretty cool pattern. So let's say within the shape you have now, you have the pattern fill, but you think, you know, I wish this was kind of the little more, I want to move this whole pattern within the shape. Well, how do you do that? Make sure you're on the pattern layer within the appearance panel. So if you select the shape, make sure you're on that layer with the fill. And if you hold down the tilde key, which is the little snake icon on the key underneath the escape key, and this isn't ideal. This is like, you have to eyeball it. There is no precision way to do this. If you hold the tilde key down and just move it, it looks like we're moving the whole box. So if I move it over here, you're going, why would you do that? Well, we're not. It's just moving the filled pattern within that shape. So unfortunately, there's no live effect to see it moving, but this is how you move it just to adjust it over. Kind of wonky. That's one aspect I think they could improve upon, but that's that. Let's say you like this pattern and you're working on a brand specific project, and you've taken, let's say, the logo mark, and you've created a nice pattern using that, and you want to share that asset. Then the easiest way to do it again would be to take this now and just drag and drop it down into the graphic styles. So if you get rid of this, and maybe you have a circular shape, you can apply that graphic style to it. And that's how you can keep using it. God, that'd make cool paper plates now that I'm looking at it. But that's that. Now, I've covered a lot of things in the time period we've had. I had to kind of cherry pick what I think are the most important tools and methods that you're going to use a lot once you start using this. So I am giving everybody attending this a 50% discount on my book. Comes with 7 hours of video, 4 gigabytes of resource files you can download and kind of go through at your own pace to see how things were constructed or put together. And I think you'd like it. My weekly series, Drawing Vector Graphics Laboratory, is where I do a lot of experimentation with some of the features that a lot of people don't use too much. And I show you how you could potentially use them. That's kind of fun. You might like that. You'd find it on LinkedIn Learning along with all my other content. So I guess we can do Q&A now if you want. If you have any specific questions about Illustrator, since I have Illustrator open, I could go ahead and kind of try to respond to those.
Thank you, Vaughn. I've been using Illustrator for about 20 years now, and even I still learned some stuff. Loved your session. Guys, if y'all have any questions, make sure to put them into the questions tab. We do have a professor that commented, I use Illustrator a good bit, but mostly intro it to college students. I have learned several things I didn't know. Thanks, Vaughn. I love your tip on just getting in there and figuring out what tools are there and what they do.
Thanks.
If anybody else has any questions. It's a lot of great stuff. I did go ahead and post your links for the book deal and all of your social into the comments area or the chat area.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, if anybody does have any questions, I know for myself, I'll listen to something or attend something, and it's always after the fact is when I come up with the questions. So if that happens to you, just email it to me and I'll respond to it.
Yes, and we'll also have you again tomorrow joining us at 12:15 p.m. Central for creative problem solving. So, of course, we can take more questions during it as well.
Sure.
So thank you so much for joining us today. We've had several, thanks for the great tips and info, great presentation. Thank you for your time. Someone said that you are the wizard, a vector wizard.
I know somebody in Germany who's, that's who I ask questions to because she really understands how to do things.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We will see y'all shortly at 11:30 a.m. Central. We will host our Day 2 roundtables. With those, we will have Regional Directors Jenny Contos and Jennifer Cooley discussing member sourcing and member value. So we will see you guys shortly. Thank you.